Hey guys, Chris from WobbaCast here. I want to thank you for joining us on our first episode where Rohit and I take a deep dive into the Legend of Zelda series. This is a long form discussion that lasts for a couple of hours, but we hope you get a sense of how much the Zelda games mean to us and how excited we are for the series' future. Thanks again and enjoy the show. Hey everybody, welcome to WobbaCast, a podcast where we talk about video games and the like. Today, we are going to be talking a lot about Legend of Zelda, so I'm pretty excited about getting into that. But first, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Rohit Krasta.
Hey,
How's it going?
good. It's going really great.
Good weekend? It's Sunday.
Yeah, relaxing.
Yeah, going back to work then.
Yep.
So, let's go ahead and get into this. I just said that we're going to be talking about Zelda, and I want to ask you, what was your first Zelda game?
Sure. My first Zelda game would have been Majora's Mask on the N64.
Hmm.
Pretty sure it came with the N64. No, that can't be right. It must have been a little bit after I got an N64, but it was one of my earlier games. I got an N64 very late, and I didn't really know what to expect. It was given to me as a Christmas present, and I just got really immersed in the world, and it was awesome.
So you received Majora's Mask as part of your gift, or you eventually got it down the line?
Yeah, I got it as a Christmas present. I think it came out in like the fall season, and then so I would have gotten it pretty close to after it came out.
And this released a year after Ocarina of Time, right?
I think 2 years. I think it was 2000.
Got it. Okay. And did you ever have any experiences with any other Zelda games? Maybe watching your older brothers play, or
No,
did
not
you?
really. Actually, my cousin had Link's Awakening, and I didn't recognize it as like a Zelda game. I was just like one of his Game Boy games that I might have put in or seen at some point, like over his shoulder, but I didn't like register Zelda. I didn't recognize the franchise, so it's like vague in my memory, but not significant.
Hmm.
So Majora's Mask was really my first Zelda experience.
Okay. How did you play it? Was it easy or difficult for you?
I remember it being a little bit difficult, particularly the parts where that are more open-ended. For example, the initial sections of getting through Clock Town and trying to figure out how to get towards a dungeon. I actually felt like I did better with the dungeons themselves because, or the temples. The temples tended to be more directed and more constrained, and I think I worked better in that environment at that age. I was
Hmm.
10, so um, yeah. With the lack of direction or the seeming lack of direction at times in the more open-ended segments when you're kind of between the temples, that's where I probably got stuck a lot more.
Yeah. And I think some people consider Majora's Mask the more one of the more difficult Zelda games, right?
I'm not sure. I know that I know that it's a little bit different in its construction and it has some different formulas, but I'm not sure if I haven't heard that.
Oh, well, I mean, me personally, I tried picking up Majora's Mask on the Virtual Console on the Wii, and because I heard such great things about it, even though it's kind of a divisive title, but it does have its fan base, and I wanted to try it out, and I had completed Ocarina of Time on the 3DS, which I had a total blast with, and when I tried Majora's Mask out, I was just very stressed out by trying to manage my time, and that was
Right.
something that I really struggled with. So I honestly couldn't even make it through the first segment of that game where you're trying to find your ocarina to transform you back into
Right.
human and then set the cycle back all over again. So I
Right.
got frustrated and I quit. And then Majora's Mask, it came out on the 3DS. When was this? 2014, I'd like to say. And I tried it, and I got much further than I did before. I think I completed the dungeon when you transform into a Goron,
Right.
and I had fun, but I wasn't really into the aspect of having to revisit things because time was running out, right?
Right,
Um,
right. Actually, now that you mention it, I do remember. I was mentioning like open-ended segments, but really, now that you mention it, it was that first arc, the first arc of getting back to human form. is a very long arc, actually. It's like a long string of events that you have to do all in the course of a single 3-day segment in order. If you stop, there's no saving, which is pretty intense of a punishment for the first part of the game.
Yeah, they
And it's
actually
funny. Yeah.
didn't they alleviated it a little bit in the 3DS version because
Oh, did they?
they made save points more available.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
you didn't have to. In the N64 version, could you only save when you restart a cycle, or how did that go?
So in the N64 version, the owls worked differently. In the N64 version, what happened was first of all, you couldn't save at all until you, for the first time, got the ocarina and turned back into a human and got them. So that's a long string of events where there was just no saving allowed at all.
Wow.
Once you get the ocarina, now you have only that one option for saving, which is, restart the entire 3 days. That was the only way you could actually save and keep things. And even then, you wouldn't keep certain items like rupees and collectibles. So it's pretty harsh for a game at that time. And the statues only worked once you got the sword, which came a little bit after you turned into a human, and also let you leave the town, Clock Town. But when you get a sword, then you can hit a statue, and then that'll let you save. But even then, you could only save and like start again at that exact same point. So it was like you had to actually resave every time. It was kind of a weird system. It's kind of like a temp save.
Yeah.
Like if you came back from an owl and then you died, you wouldn't start at the owl again. You would actually start over. You had to go and hit the owl again.
Oh man, that's so complicated.
Yeah, it was pretty complicated.
So you played that game as a 10-year-old, and trying to cope with that new system, was that difficult for you? Was that pretty challenging? Did you ever, get fed up with it, or did you just learn to roll with it?
I don't 100% remember, but also keep in mind it was my first Zelda, so I didn't have any expectation that was really broken.
Okay.
My only expectation was from earlier platforming games, which themselves are pretty strict in saving. Old platforming games, especially Donkey Kong, they only let you save once per world, basically. And you'd have to beat like 8 or 9 levels before you could save again. So that was pretty rough, too. So since I had no reference point, I think I was able to put up with it.
Got it. Yeah, my first Zelda game was actually Wind Waker, and I played it when it originally came out on GameCube. So that was, I'm gonna just ballpark it, maybe 2002, 2003, right? And
yeah, I think actually, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and it was the first Zelda game that I ever played. Before that, my experiences with video games were, more strict to games like Sonic Adventure. And Sonic Adventure is a very straightforward, linear type of game. And when I tried Legend of Zelda, I had no idea that I could explore, I needed to complete puzzles and look for stuff in these dungeons. So when I played Wind Waker, it was really tough for me. I couldn't understand what I needed to do. And I made it to, the Forsaken Fortress, I think it's what it's called. It's either Forsaken or Forbidden, I don't remember. But the stealth section...
Yeah, Forbidden Woods, maybe?
No, it's not the Forbidden Woods. It's where you go after Outset Island, and you're trying to rescue Aryll, your sister.
Forsaken Forest sounds right.
Yeah. So I got there, and the stealth sections were really tough for me, just because I had never played a stealth game either, And I got to... I did eventually complete it, but I heavily relied on a guide for this. And I made it to Dragon Roost Island. I completed Dragon Roost Island, and then I made it to the forest area.
I'm sorry. You're talking about the Forsaken Fortress.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you said the forest. Sorry, I was confused.
No, but there is a forest. The forest takes place after after Dragon Roost Island.
Dragon Roost Island, yeah.
And I don't think I completed not Dragon Roost Island. I don't think I completed the Forest Temple. But again, it was a brand new experience for me. I had never played a game like Wind Waker or Legend of Zelda for that matter. And I remember going to the public library, and I would be printing out guides from GameFAQs, and this is when you
nice.
had to pay 10 cents for every page that you print out. And I had no idea that printing out these GameFAQs guides, I would be printing hundreds of pages at the library.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool just to have this, this little pamphlet that you could look to as a reference.
Yeah, yeah. I remember using GameFAQs too when I got stuck on games.
Yeah,
But I don't remember printing so much. I remember using it directly on the internet, but
yeah.
it's kind of fuzzy.
I yeah, I didn't have a computer nearby where I so I had my GameCube set up in my bedroom and I didn't have a computer in there. So I would either have to run to the computer in the living room or,
Right.
sometimes it was just more convenient to print out the guide to take a look at. But
Makes sense.
but when I was playing Wind Waker, I felt really dumb, and I know that I would consider that Wind Waker is one of the easier Zelda games that I've played, but because it was such a brand new experience for me, it was something that I struggled with, and I never completed it the first time I had it. I actually bought this game when it came out, and because I couldn't figure out what to do, I sold it. But then I started becoming more interested in it because I there was something about The Legend of Zelda that really stuck with me, and I think it was just being able to interact with people and go to shops and stuff. That was really cool for me. That
Yeah,
was immersive.
absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
bought it again, and my two friends and I we were playing it, and we would take turns holding on to my GameCube, and we would just play sections of it for a weekend or something, and then we would pass it off to the next person.
Nice.
So I actually never beat the game. I just played certain sections of it, and when the conclusion of the game came up, it was with my friend. So
Right.
after we beat the game, I ended up selling the game again, and then then college was starting, and I was actually helping our friend Sean Rubin, and
Yeah.
he had Wind Waker, and he was packing up for college, and he was also trying to clean out his room and get rid of stuff, and I saw that he had Wind Waker, and I said, oh man, I love this game, I wish I never sold it. And then he just gave it to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then in college I actually got the chance to play it from start to finish by myself, and it wasn't the first Zelda game that I beat, because I beat Twilight Princess, and but it was the first Zelda game that I ever played, and completing Wind Waker on my own was really rewarding, and I enjoyed it so much, and it just stands out so much to me in the series.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Wind Waker is definitely up there for me.
Awesome.
Um
It's funny you mentioned Sean. Actually, I have a really quick story. When I had Majora's Mask,
oh, I remember this, yeah.
Sean actually had Ocarina of Time, um, and we were good friends at the time. And he was playing, or I think he had beaten Ocarina already, and we just like got into an argument about which was better, Majora's or Ocarina. And of course,
Yeah.
neither of us had played the other game. We had no reference point, but we were so emotionally attached to our experiences that we just decided definitively, oh, definitely our game is better.
Yeah.
I later found out that he was right. I definitely like Ocarina better, but it's just funny to think about how we were so attached to our experiences that it was just the obvious answer.
hmm
Yeah.
Was it the first time that he played Ocarina of Time? I mean, you guys were both playing these at the same time, right?
Roughly, I don't think it was really like at the exact same time. I
Okay.
think he had Ocarina a little earlier, maybe
hmm
even because he had an N64 way before I did.
Okay.
I got an N64 very late in the cycle. I
hmm
typically got consoles pretty late in cycles.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a little bit later, but yeah.
Okay. And just to round out this our first Zelda experiences, where would you place Majora's Mask in your other Zelda experiences?
Oh, it's really hard to say.
Yeah.
I like a lot of them for different reasons, so
hmm
I couldn't give it a rank, but it's up there.
Okay.
And it always has a special place in my heart because it's what introduced me to the series.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, Wind Waker for me, it's up there. It's way up there. And I think it's just, well, I'm going to get ahead of myself because we actually end this episode by talking about our favorite Zeldas, and it kind of just so happens that Wind Waker is either tied with another game or is in fact my favorite Zelda game. So I'll just wait till we finish up this episode. But
Sure.
so let's move on a little bit. I'd like to talk about 2D Zelda games and 3D Zelda games, and we can just kind of the Zelda series is so influential in video game history, and it's kind of like Zelda's arrival in classic gaming with the first Legend of Zelda. That was a big moment in history, and then it did it all over again when Ocarina of Time came out as a 3D Zelda game.
Absolutely.
So let's discuss that a little bit. What 2D Zelda games have you played?
I've played them all, with the
Oh wow,
exception
okay.
of Zelda 2. That's the only one I haven't played. Um, Although I've read a little bit about it, but I've never played Zelda 2. But I played the rest of them,
Hmm.
not including the CDI games. I have not played those either.
But those aren't even. Are those made by Nintendo?
No, they're not. They're not in the
Okay,
main series, so I
got
don't
it.
really count them. But I've played all of the normal Zelda games in the series.
Okay. So what do you think made the original Zelda so special and so monumental?
Sure. So I played the original Zelda very late in my Zelda experience. I had already played many other Zeldas before that, probably 6 or 7. So my experience of it was probably very different than someone who picked up the original Zelda with NES, way back in 1987, I think. Is that
Hmm.
correct? Sounds right. Or it could be
I mean,
1986, I
you
think.
know better than I do.
Yeah, I think it's 1986 is when Zelda came out. Um, yeah, and I think what made it different, many people know that Miyamoto based it on his childhood experience of exploring the woods behind his house. He used
Yep.
to love exploring and he used to just love the feeling of adventure and finding things, and he was trying to sort of recreate that experience in an open world game, which is funny because the concept of an open world game didn't even really exist before then. They'd only really existed in maybe text RPGs and that kind of stuff. So I think what it did was it gave a new sense of freedom, and a new sense of really trusting the player to do it their own way, that had not been seen before. I mean, especially when you compare it to Miyamoto's other flagship series at the time, which Mario, which was very linear and very handcrafted at every moment. Zelda felt so different for players to go about, take a sword and then just try and figure things out on their own. So, I mean, I could only imagine. It must have been an awesome time. I would love to peer into kids at that time playing Zelda for the first time and discussing strategies and sharing secrets because that was the
Yeah,
only way they could at that time.
that was your
Crazy.
that was your strategy guide. Your friends were your resource for that.
Yeah, it would have been an awesome time and I imagine discovering Zelda with the original game would have been just magical because there was nothing like it before it.
When did you play the original Zelda?
I don't know. I never beat it actually, but I probably played it. I played it on an emulator for sure, and I played it maybe 2004, 2005.
Okay, so you were older then.
Yeah, I was much older, and I'd played several 3D Zeldas, and I'd played some Game Boy Zeldas. So it was kind of like more. It was very intentionally. I want to play the original Zelda because I want to see what the original was like, and it
Hmm.
was yeah. It wasn't like I just stumbled upon it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you
Um,
play any other Zelda games before? Well, besides Majora's Mask, did you play any other games in the series leading up to the original Zelda?
Oh yeah, many of them. So what I had done was probably Majora's Mask was the first one, and then I think the next one might have been A Link to the Past on the Game Boy Advance when they
Okay.
re-released it,
And
and that introduced me to
that was with
2D
Four
Zelda.
Swords Adventure, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that probably introduced me to 2D Zeldas, and
Hmm.
then between that game and Majora's Mask, I was just sold on Zelda. At that point, I was like, I'm a Zelda fan. I need to find the rest of these games.
Hmm.
And I would say when Wind Waker released, they had a pre-release deal where you
Oh
could, if you
yeah.
pre-ordered it, it came with Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Um,
It
so
also came
that
with
was
Majora's
just
Mask and the original Zelda, right?
no, no, no. I don't
Well,
believe so. I think that
oh
was a
well,
newer bundle. That's a newer bundle that came out on GameCube. But the original, it was just a pre-order of Wind Waker.
yeah,
They
you
gave
got
you a copy of Master Quest.
yeah,
Ocarina of Time, regular, and Master Quest is the two options you could play.
yeah.
Um, and I just, man, I couldn't believe how awesome Master Quest was. It felt like such an awesome. It's the hardest Zelda game in my opinion.
Oh really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah,
I gotta try that out then.
well, Master Quest is amazing, and it really pushed me to the limit in such a fun way. Um, that really just got me so pumped. So by the time Wind Waker actually came out, because I pre-ordered it and played through Master Quest, I was like at that point just in love with the Zelda series, you know.
Yeah.
And Wind Waker couldn't have been better timing for me because it was at the peak of my wow, this is an awesome series
Mm-hmm.
moments.
So getting back to the original Zelda first,
Sure.
what was it difficult for you to play? You say that you never beat it, and I would like to try the original Zelda, but I'm a little bit intimidated by it because you don't you I remember seeing something where you have to, you get your sword and then you go into the forest or something, or you go to a bay and then you're supposed to light something on fire, and um, that opens up an entrance to either a dungeon or a new area. And
Right.
there aren't really any hints of that. The game doesn't really give you any direction. Is that true?
It is very true. There's no hand holding in the game compared to newer Zeldas. And that was something that, even though I totally get why people love that experience and what made it awesome, it wasn't for me when I finally got to Legend of Zelda, the original, because it just felt a little too random sometimes. It's fine for things to be kind of, letting you figure out your own. I don't mind figuring out puzzles on my own. I don't mind a little bit of challenge. But when it feels random, like sometimes there was just a wall that you just had to guess, try bombs in random spots. And there were some tricks, but they were really obscure to find out how to place bombs in random locations and open random doors. That to me was a little bit of a turnoff,
Yeah.
although I did enjoy it. Plus, there's not really puzzles in the same way that there are in newer Zelda games, particularly in the dungeons. So that lack of puzzles was a little bit less interesting to me because I was already used to the puzzles in the newer games.
Oh, okay.
But I still enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed the experience, and I probably got about 6 or 7. I was pretty close to the end, and I don't remember why I stopped, but I do remember feeling turned off by just how open-ended it was
Yeah.
and how little hand-holding there was.
And that's actually that's a good way of distinguishing the original Zelda with Link to the Past, because Link to the Past actually kind of, gave you this map, and there were numbers that were on these areas of the map that you could pursue those dungeons in, right? So there was a little bit more direction.
Oh, absolutely. And Link to the Past, I think, defines what's now known as the 2D formula
Mm-hmm.
for a Zelda game. Link to the Past is almost like taking that vision to the extreme, to its fruition.
So tell us about that formula for the 2D Zelda game that that Link to the Past set up as a template. So let's get into that a little bit.
Sure, sure. I mean, the basic template, which actually is pretty similar to what's now considered a Metroidvania formula, essentially it's like your progression is based on your abilities, and you are on a top-down map in a Zelda game, and where you can go is dictated by what you can do. And that very straightforward concept is baked into you, so that when you get to something, you either have to figure out a puzzle, how do I cross this pit? How do I open this door? How do I break down this wall? Something is blocking you in some direction. And typically it's about growth. So the whole game is about powering up over time by gaining new abilities, gaining new items. Many of them come in the form of items. And every time you get something, you're actually slowly expanding your 2D space. And that's kind of the formula, is that it's actually linear if you count the dungeons in order. The game is technically linear in its progression, but it feels like exploration, and it feels like an open-ended game because you're moving in all different directions, and the progression path is scattered. So, yeah. Typically, that's also highlighted with, of course, the temples, which really give the player a clear sense of progression. Like, oh, I beat the next temple, and there's 9 total temples. So I know how far I am roughly in the game.
Yeah.
Which they didn't, by the way, flip until that's kind of funny because that was an expectation that was set in Link to the Past, and it's actually in previous Zelda games too. That's kind of what made Ocarina of Time even more of a standout because they set like, oh, there's 3 temples. So they were working off that expectation they'd already set in previous Zelda games, and you saw a lot of people actually thought they were going to beat the game when they finally got to the Temple of Time and pulled the Master Sword out. They might have thought it was like, oh, pull out the Master Sword and then go beat Ganon. Instead, they got the wonderful surprise of turning to adult and finding out they were not even halfway through the game.
Oh wow.
So, Yeah, and that shocked people at the time. They had no idea that this game was so massive.
Oh man, because I beat Link Between Worlds, and I know that it's supposed to be either a sequel or a spiritual successor of Link to the Past, and I did enjoy Link Between Worlds, and I want to go back and play Link to the Past. I'm actually dying to play it, and recently they released a full color manga adaptation of Link to the Past, and I bought it, but I don't want to read it until I beat the game. And I know that Zelda games are kind of predictable with how their stories are, but I just want to experience it on the original format in game and then go back and read it just to get
Right.
just to appreciate it even more.
Oh yeah, you know what? Actually, now that you mention it, I think that's unfair because I think Link to the Past did actually use 3 initial temples and then 6 more. I could be
Oh,
wrong.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's definitely
that's a
a
trope.
Zelda.
Yeah,
That's a Zelda thing. And we're going to
yeah.
get into that sort of stuff.
Because it is the same thing.
So
You do have to
just
go get the Master Sword, but it's just in the woods instead.
yeah. And it's the whole you first collect 3 things and then that helps you finish the first act of the game, and then you obtain the Master Sword, but then you have to collect another number of things in another number
Right.
of dungeons, and that leads you to the end of the game.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
But yeah, again, we're gonna get into that later on. But just to wrap this first segment up, let's talk about Ocarina of Time. I wanted to talk about 3 key points in the series history. There was the original Legend of Zelda, and that was a huge hit. Then Link to the Past, and like you said, Link to the Past kind of set up this formula of what makes a Zelda game, or at least in the 2D space. And then Ocarina of Time arrives on the scene and just blows up the world, and people still consider it, one, if not the greatest game of all time. So let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah. Before, just real quick, I got to correct myself. Link to the
Okay.
Past actually didn't invent that formula. It just executed it so well. It took everything that was done in previous Zeldas and just did it that much better that it kind of established it as a formula. Does that make sense?
Wait, so the original Legend of Zelda also had that kind of setup?
It didn't have the 3 act setup with, it didn't have like the 3 temples and then the next set of temples set up necessarily, but it did have the same overall idea of your progression is, based on your abilities and you're moving in 2D space.
Got it.
The basic ideas were all there. It's just that Link to the Past did it so well that once you play Link to the Past and you understood how fantastic the game it was, now it's like cemented as a formula. Does that make
Got it.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Link to the
Um,
Past, is that the 3rd or 4th game in the series?
It's the 3rd game.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's another reason is that Link's 2 departed a bit from what Zelda 1 did. So
Mhm.
kind of Link to the Past was kind of like brought it back to what the original was all about and took it a step further.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So anyway, back to Ocarina. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And I want to hear your thoughts on Ocarina of Time because you're so much more informed on this type of stuff, and let's just discuss Ocarina of Time and how it shook the industry, and how it influenced so many other games later on.
Sure. I don't know if I say I'm more informed, but in terms of Ocarina of Time, it really set the stage for what's now known as the action adventure genre, or just like that kind of adventure genre. And it also um, took on this amazing challenge of applying the feel of Zelda in a 3D context. I think it deserves a lot of credit for first of all, just telling it a totally epic story, and an epic adventure that really feels like an adventure in every way. It had a massive world for the time. It had awesome challenges and awesome enemies, but I think real credit should go towards the fact that they had to solve some real problems. For example, the implementation of Z-targeting is well known as a huge innovation, and it's not loved by everybody, but I think it was a huge success and a huge way to make sure that players could stay focused on what was important at any given time. For example, if players were constantly reorienting the camera and constantly focused on controlling the camera manually, they wouldn't be able to enjoy puzzle solving. Because the camera is not an easy thing to manage, and players were still at that time pretty new to 3D games. So by giving the camera a more automatic control system through Z-targeting, there's a sort of one-on-one feeling of like I'm one-on-one with this enemy that I'm facing. I'm actually only moving in 2D. I can either strafe, left or right, or I can go towards or backwards, and everything becomes simpler, in a good way. If otherwise, I think you would have ended up in a game where players were constantly swinging their swords wildly, cameras were shifting all over the place,
Yeah.
and just missing enemies all the time and getting frustrated. So I think that they should get a lot of credit for the Z targeting system.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't even imagine playing the games that that I love without having that Z targeting. And it is nice to free the target lock on some games just so you can have a little bit of more movement and so you're not restricted to that 2D plane. But
Absolutely.
Z targeting just solves so many problems that that I've experienced in Sonic, for instance, moving in a 3D space where and the camera is kind of just behaving on its own, that would pull me out of the gaming experience. And
Right.
Z targeting kind of just, I don't think that Z targeting would necessarily work in a game like Sonic, obviously.
No, it wouldn't because of the movement, the constant movement, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Whereas Link is more about focused. Either you're focused on one thing or you're focused on the room as a room.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of, those two modes work really well. It's like either you're not Z targeting and you're like solving a puzzle, or you're kind of, things are a little bit slower paced, and when things are intense, you're Z targeting an enemy, and you're strafing and you're trying to keep your positioning, but typically you care about one enemy more than the other. And that's why the most common gripe of Z targeting, which is a totally fair gripe, is that it's hard to manage. It didn't really quite deal with lots of enemies at once very well.
Yeah.
In particular, like, players have memories, I'm sure, of fighting like 10 keys at the same time. And then it's like you're Z targeting one of them, and one of them is attacking you from behind, and the camera's trying to adjust, and that's when it kind of breaks down a little bit. But first
I
of all,
actually
in
never
all modern
really.
settings, just use the boomerang.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have too many problems with the having to target multiple keys in the 3D Zelda games. And I kind of liked how if I'm Z targeting one, I quickly kill it and then I release the target and then initiate it again to target another one. So it's kind of like I was snapping my lock on quickly just so I could take these multiple enemies that are huge pain in the ass and just take them out quickly instead of it was more about getting rid of all of them as fast as you can instead of just taking your time and strafing and whatnot. So
Right.
It was actually fun to just snap to different targets instead of well, maybe I just trained myself to do it that way quickly so I wouldn't fumble.
Yeah, everyone's different. There is an option to either make it so you hold to Z target, or you toggle Z targeting, and I find the holding option actually is a lot easier.
Oh yeah.
You have a lot more precision anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Another innovation I think Ocarina of Time should get credit for is, I don't know if I'd say it's an innovation, but it's just an accomplishment. It's just how immersive the world was and how thought out and developed the characters and races were. In previous Zeldas, there's sort of implied there's these races and there's some story, and players could dig in and try and make guesses about what was going on. But in Ocarina of Time, it was very developed. Every single race had its own identity. Every single area had its own atmosphere to it, and it really felt like this world was living and breathing in a way that other games hadn't really accomplished before. So I think that is just so cool and really made Zelda stand out as just this epic adventure.
Yeah. When you bring up the subject of the different races in the series, that's actually something that I really appreciate about the Zelda games. So, you have your Gorons and you have your Zoras, right?
Yeah.
And in other fantasy medieval type media, in books or in movies and all that, you usually have dwarves and elves and humans, right? But with Zelda, they kind of invented their own races that are totally unique to Zelda.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's something that I really love about.
It's funny, yeah. You're right. You're talking about like the high fantasy tropes that are like Tolkien based, based on Lord of the Rings. And you're right. Zelda totally didn't take that. I mean, it'd be interesting to research some Japanese mythology, and I wonder if something came from there, or if things were just, I don't know where they came from, the influences, but they're really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because, definitely experienced Zelda and those races before I even read anything about mythology. So in my head, they came out of nowhere. It was just the Zelda world. They have
Yeah.
so much personality. I don't really associate them with high fantasy or anything else, which is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's actually something that, is so important to the Zelda series where, building the world and creating these, totally unique and endearing characters and it just sucks you in. Even if you're not completely sold on the game's mechanics and systems, you will hopefully, just be enveloped by how welcoming and beautiful this world is and how well it is put together.
sure.
So,
And the last thing I would bring up as a major point of Ocarina of Time, this is just three things of thousands of things that make that game amazing.
yeah.
But I think the sense of growth is really, really taken to a new extreme. So there's always that feeling of growth in earlier Zelda games where you're slowly getting more items, your items are getting more powerful, you're killing enemies with less hits. That's always been in Zelda, but in Ocarina of Time, it just feels like you're actually becoming a hero. So
Hmm.
they drain into this idea like there's the hero of time, and you really feel like you become that hero by the end of the game. You even just the moment of turning into an adult is so, which was again a surprise to players at the
Yeah.
time. Players didn't expect to turn into an adult. Um, Link was never really portrayed as an adult in earlier games. He was always kind of like a younger kid look,
Hmm.
and it was a little ambiguous. But now you were clearly an adult,
Yeah.
and like that feeling of of growth where now you could do things you can do as a kid. Now you're upgrading from the slingshot to the bow and arrow. All that kind of stuff just really makes you feel more badass just in general,
Yeah.
and it makes everything like the stakes are higher, right? When you're
Yeah.
finally going up against Ganondorf, and you're even just like the Rainbow Bridge and like entering his castle, everything just feels so intense, and all the stakes are on your shoulders, and all the things you've done lead up to that point and make you feel like I am the hero of time. I'm ready to take on Ganondorf. You
Yeah.
know, at
It,
that point
it
everything's
is.
dark. It's crazy.
Yeah. I remember when I was in my freshman year of college, my friends, my roommate's girlfriend at the time, she was obsessed with Ocarina of Time. She played it over and over and again, and she would just marathon this game over a
Nice.
weekend, and she knew everything about this game. And she said, um, now that I'm older, I get to use bow and arrow because kids can't use bow and arrows. And I was thinking, wait, seriously? And I had never played Ocarina of Time before, and it was just really interesting to me that, when you're a kid, you can only use the slingshot. You can't use
Right.
the bow and arrow, and then when you're older, you could use the bow and arrow. And I just thought that was such a funny thing because if you give a kid a bow and arrow, the kid will probably hurt themselves. So I appreciate that demonstration of growth. But to be honest, felt like I never felt that growth when I play Zelda games in general because I never feel like I'm taking on enemies in a faster and more efficient way. Like my character has become stronger and he's
Oh,
just able to
sure.
deal more damage.
Sure.
But I do feel the growth as a player when I go into these dungeons and I'm able to solve these puzzles because the game has, taught me pretty well to understand how everything works.
Right.
But
Right. That's
yeah, I
true. It
mean,
doesn't have like an RPG like growth in that way.
yeah, I feel the growth as a player. I don't feel it as much as watching Link grow, but it's still good though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so that's the first segment, and we're upcoming is or not upcoming, coming up next. We're going to be talking about moving on from Ocarina of Time. Is the Zelda series starting to lose steam with its recent titles in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword? So we're going to be getting into that, and we'll see you guys in a few minutes. Hey everybody, welcome back to WobbaCast, and we're talking about the Legend of Zelda series and how it's been so influential and how much it means to us as gamers. And now we're going to start talking about the current state of Zelda. There are some people who believe that the Zelda series is starting to lose steam, starting with Twilight Princess, uh, even though it was beloved and people were looking forward to it at the time, especially after people were disappointed by Wind Waker, even though the game was really that great. So don't listen to people that think it's awful. Um, Twilight Princess, it was a good game, but it was also very derivative and super reactionary. And I think it was there to appease the people that really wanted that Ocarina of Time experience all over again, but just in the new generation that the Wii brought to us, right?
Right.
So again, I think that Twilight Princess it's a good game. I enjoy it a lot. I had very good memories of it, but it's also not as revolutionary as we might expect a Zelda game to be at the time, right?
Sure. So yeah, I would agree with that. I think that it has a lot of strengths in its own regard. I wasn't crazy about Twilight Princess personally, and I would agree that it's very much a reactionary product in terms of trying to return to the roots of the Ocarina of Time formula, and also trying to win back the mature audience specifically. It wasn't just formulaic, but also it was thematically trying to resonate more with older audiences, which I think is a totally, totally fair thing to try and do. Like, I have no gripes with Nintendo for making Twilight Princess and for taking that route because it really does make a lot of sense. They made the Wind Waker. They were a lot riskier with their theme, and it turned off lots of people who, especially after the Space World demo. I mean, they kind of set themselves up, right? They gave you
Yeah.
the Space World demo that was epic and awesome, and people bought into it. And then they showed another trailer, which was, of course, for the original Wind Waker. And in fact, back then, it was really not defined yet as a style. And I think that trailer is really like the huge, huge, huge mistake. The way they presented that trailer at the time they did after Space Worlds kind of took people out of it and really turned them off. By the time Wind Waker even came out, people were already upset with the game before they even played it. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the idea of people coming with a fresh mind and buying into Wind Waker was pretty tough. So, I think Twilight Princess was like, let's back up a second. Let's try to make something that's more mature, something a little bit darker, which they succeeded in, but I think maybe it was a little bit too much of a constraint where it didn't feel like it had its own
Hmm.
unique personality. Um,
Yeah.
but that's definitely debatable.
Yeah. I wasn't upset by Wind Waker, and again, Wind Waker was my first Zelda experience. I had seen Zelda and Link in Super Smash Brothers before, so I was familiar with the type of tone that Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask set for the series.
Sure.
But with Wind Waker, I guess it's just because I wasn't as committed or so deep into the series that I wasn't hurt or offended by
Yeah,
Wind
yeah.
Waker
And I
when it
and I
when it
totally get
released.
it. I don't remember exactly how I felt. I remember watching the Space World demo and being super excited. And I remember seeing the Wind Waker trailer and being really turned off by the trailer. But I was fortunate enough that when I finally did play Wind Waker, I ended up falling in love with it. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that it wasn't the same case for a lot of people. A lot of people they really invested and justly so in the dark experiences of going into the future in Ocarina of Time as an adult and everything was ruined, and then playing Majora's Mask and getting another dark experience. They had a
Hmm.
real expectation for what Zelda was about, and a feeling of maturity was baked into it. So Wind Waker, in its art style alone, communicated this idea of like childlike and communicated this idea
Yeah.
of like triviality, which I think really turned players off. And if players come into a game thinking triviality might, nothing matters, this isn't important, this doesn't feel like there's any stakes, it's not cool, then it's going to be a lot harder to buy into it. So I think Twilight
Yeah.
Princess, of course, reversed that and attempt to take it back, which is a shame because I don't think it's necessarily fair to judge Wind Waker under that expectation when it really has a lot of great things on its own right. So
Yeah, and it seems that I think it's safe to say that gamers will consider experiences on consoles to be I don't want to say the more serious format, but do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's
I do.
okay. I don't know how to explain myself on that part, but so I apologize for that. But you know how the Wind Waker style has kind of been that's been the style that a lot of the handheld Zeldas have just adopted.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of feels like they're the less important installments in the series
Yeah, I
in
think
a
that
way.
that's kind of what it is that they maybe have a better understanding of their audience now, and they are
Mm-hmm.
trying to make sure, like, they figured, there's a lighthearted Link that we love in here. Miyamoto himself really bought into that kind of Link and that kind of adventure because he associates his original adventures with being a kid exploring the
Mm-hmm.
woods. His adventures as a kid were not mature adventures against Ganondorf. So, um,
Yeah.
and so I think that childlike wonder, that's I think the word I think is sort of the difference, is that feeling of wonder was something that Miyamoto wanted to capture more of in Wind Waker. And then maybe that turned off players because they weren't as used to, or they didn't either engage with the wonder as much. They were more interested in the epicness,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, which definitely comes more in hand with the darker approaches of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Twilight Princess. So,
Yeah.
um,
But it's tough though. I'm not dying to see another console Zelda game in that Wind Waker style or that tone that Wind Waker established, but with Wind Waker, I feel like that game is so important to the series, and it follows in the footsteps of the original Legend of Zelda up to Link to the Past, right? Where you're a child and a child is able to shift the movement of the world and conquer evil, right?
sure.
And spoiler if you've never played Wind Waker, but at the end of the game when Ganondorf is about to touch the Triforce to make his wish, but King Daphnes beats him to it, right?
Right.
King Daphnes makes a wish that Hyrule will be washed away and that the new generation will come and succeed and everything. So it's kind of like the fate of the world rests on the future generation.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
you have these kids that are, they're succeeding through all odds, and I love that. I appreciate that that whimsical and wondrous story that the
Absolutely.
fate of the world rests in kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
I totally get that. And in fairness, Majora's Mask did have also a kid Link. Um,
yeah,
but it was, maybe slightly older than the I think he was like 2 years older than the kid Link in
yeah,
uh, Ocarina of Time, and that game was just so oozing with its own dark atmosphere that it really never felt kid-like. It really felt like, what am I doing in this strange, almost like taking roots in a little bit of Alice in Wonderland, that sort of really
oh yeah,
otherworldly, alien feeling of like, what is going on here? Everything is off a bit, which
yeah.
they executed on brilliantly, but obviously that's why no one thinks about, and they shouldn't, Majora's Mask as like a kid-like game. But
Yeah.
it's just about buying in, right? I think that if you try to play Wind Waker with the same sort of expectation and viewpoint, you kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. Whereas
Yeah.
if you
I
bought
I totally
into,
agree.
whereas if you kind of let go of that and said like, what is this game? Maybe it's not a Zelda game. I don't know what it is yet. And you just tried it, or if you were like you and it was your first Zelda game, I think that you're probably more open to what it was. And if you do buy into Wind Waker, I think that most people would agree that if you bought into Wind Waker and its atmosphere early on in the game, it was an immensely rewarding and emotional experience. So
Oh, totally.
yeah,
Now,
so that's a
just to
shame.
rein
Yeah,
this
get us
back a
back on
little bit
track.
because we are getting a little bit off topic. So let's get back into Twilight Princess. So
Sure,
it's not your favorite Zelda game. It did you say that it has its strengths and weaknesses, but
sure.
it's not a big standout title for you, right?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that it felt a little bit loose for me in terms of the overall quest, the use of the Twilight Realm, and it didn't really feel like it gelled in the same way that, say, Link to the Past Dark World did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there were some strange decisions, and so now I have to get into spoilers, but I thought that the use of Zant and how quickly he was discarded for Ganondorf
Oh man,
was
that was so
yeah, that
frustrating.
was pretty strange and kind of threw me off a bit. I thought that some of the dungeons, specifically, some of the temples, kind of threw me off. There were also some brilliant ones. Like I was blown away by things like the Yeti's, the
Oh, that was
Yeti's
such a
house.
great.
Yeah,
The
like things like
Yeti's
that
the
were just
mansion. Yeah.
yeah, like there were temples like that were just brilliantly designed and just like I had never expected something like that in a Zelda game, and it felt like it had so much personality that I think a lot of the rest of the game was lacking. Um, you know, and they weren't ironically they weren't afraid to be like a little silly in that
Mm-hmm.
mansion, right? But I think that maybe parts of the other game were trying really hard to feel a little bit more serious, and that kind of turned me off too. Um,
Yeah.
and then when we talk about strengths, I think that it to date has the best final battle in terms of um, the horse fight with Ganondorf, followed by the one-on-one sword battle. I think might be my favorite, almost my favorite, but it was everything I wanted at that time. In terms of if the vision was bring it back to Ocarina of Time strengths, I think that battle was like succeeding on every level. It was like let's bring it back to an epic, intimate one-on-one duel. Which is really amazing because like it's almost like the reverse of Ocarina of Time. So it was both innovative and the same in terms of feeling. Where in Ocarina of Time, you start off with Ganondorf, and he, of course, transforms into Ganon, and it has its own kind of unique feel to it because you were identifying with Ganondorf the person. Whereas here, he starts off as a beast in the original battle after you fight the corrupted Zelda, and then
Just to
then you
interrupt
fight.
you real quick on
Sure.
that. So the Beast Ganon fight, I thought that was really great, and I felt so stupid though because I mean I guess it's because I wasn't playing the game straight through. I got to the water temple and I took a month-long break, right? So I didn't really remember anything.
Yeah.
um, but I forgot about the importance of Wolf Link, right? So there's the part in the Ganondorf fight where he is teleporting and he comes charging at you,
Yeah.
and you're supposed to stop him somehow. And I thought that I needed to keep shooting him with the arrows to basically down him.
Oh.
But then somebody told me, or maybe I looked it up, I don't know. But the solution was you needed to transform into Wolf Link and
Right.
use Midna to grab Beast Ganon and in a way kind of sumo him down and tackle him.
Right.
Yeah, that was something that confused me, and I was a little bit upset that I couldn't figure that out and I had to seek outside help for that.
Yeah,
But
I'm interested to know what cues they gave. I'm sure they gave some sort of cues via Minna or some sort of subtle gets, but it might have been just a puzzle thing where they were
yeah,
trying to recreate the feeling of charges, which you do in as a wolf earlier a few times, I
do you?
believe. So
I don't think
it's
so.
not
There's
it's that exact
there's the
mechanic,
beginning
but
of the game.
yeah,
There's the beginning of the game when the goats are escaping and you have to stop them, but you're human Link.
right, that's true. I don't.
So I don't.
Yeah, it's a good question. Is what I would be interested to replay that segment or watch it and see what cues, if any, did they try and give to hint at the wolf link, or maybe it was more of an intentional puzzle-like thing where they were trying to just let the player figure out on their own, just try
Yeah.
things out, trial and error. That's not working. That's not working. I have to try something new. And they do give you feedback. If I remember correctly, you turn into Wolf Link and Minna will say something,
Mm-hmm.
or there's some sort of feedback. At least I hope when you turn into Wolf Link to kind of tell you like this is what you should. This is the right direction. Keep going.
Yeah. Actually, that frustration that I experienced by not knowing to turn into Wolf Link is actually another thing that I experienced in Skyward Sword when I fought Demise in the final boss battle. But we're going to talk about Skyward Sword in a few minutes.
Sure, but
so
yeah,
I'll bring that back up.
to
then.
wrap up the Twilight Princess thing, I
Yeah.
think that they really, really, by starting off with a beast, and then going to the horse fight, and then going to the one-on-one, mano y mano in the Ring of Fire
Mhm.
sword fight, they kind of made it about intimacy, which I thought was really cool. Like that last battle was just brutal and straightforward, um, and it really, really just felt like they were coming full circle and accomplishing the vision of like let's bring this back to Ocarina of Time and make it feel epic,
Yeah.
but in a totally different kind of way than Ocarina of Time. So that was a huge success. I thought was their ending.
Talking a little bit about how well done the final battle for Twilight Princess was, it's kind of like it was a highlight reel in a way for the overall game. So for Beast Ganon, you have to go back to being a wolf.
Right.
You have to be an animal again because only an animal can defeat another animal. I
Right,
thought that
right,
was really
right.
cool.
Yeah,
Despite the fact
fairness,
that it wasn't really telegraphed
yeah,
that
I
well.
actually think that that's probably why they made Ganon's design a little bit more beast-like, and he was on all
Yeah,
fours, because they wanted to
exactly.
like
Yeah.
draw that comparison to the wolf. Whereas if they made him look like, Ganon in Ocarina of Time, it would have felt
Where he's
different.
on
It wouldn't
two.
have felt
Yeah.
like beast against beast. So I kind of like that decision. That was cool. In
Yeah.
retrospect, I like that decision. I probably wouldn't
Yeah.
have liked
Either.
it if I was had to fight him as a human and he was the final form, But by making
Yeah.
it the earlier form and making it a wolf-like fight, it was a lot more satisfying, and it felt more like this is the wolf's final thing. And that's a
Hmm.
trope in a lot of games. I think that's done well. It's like use the final battle or the phases of the final battle to test different parts of the game, to test your
Yeah.
competence, right? Like to make sure that you are at your highest level with each of those things.
Like,
And that
what
works
has the
well.
game? The game has taught you so many things. Now you gotta
Yeah,
put it all
yeah.
together in
Yeah,
a
and
way.
sometimes it becomes like a
So
variety show and it's not fun, and sometimes it's like, you have to replay the parts of the game that suck, but in this case it worked really well.
yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. So again, Beast Ganon was animal. Use your animal skills, and then horseback riding was brought back,
Yeah.
and you have to fight Ganon while on horseback, and Zelda is being badass and shooting him down with the light arrows.
Right.
So I thought that was really cool. And horseback riding was even more prominent in this game than it was in Ocarina of Time. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, this is the first Zelda game with motion controls. I don't count motion controls on the DS where you swipe the screen with your stylus, but you
Right.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
And sword, being able to have a sword fight with the Wii controls, that was a big feature.
Yep.
So when you're dueling with Ganondorf one-on-one with your swords, that's another highlight. So yeah, I agree. The finale of Twilight Princess was pretty strong, and it was a nice way of just showing all the things that you've learned and accomplished
Sure.
in the game.
So yeah, I think we could say there were definitely. I mean, and there's so many things you could talk about. The game is it's pretty big.
Yeah.
So, but there were
It's the
definitely
big,
strong parts.
is it
of
the
the
biggest
game.
Zelda game that we've seen
No, I
besides
wouldn't. I
Breath of
wouldn't
the
say
Wild?
so. It depends on how you define the size. I think it's kind of
Okay.
arguable. So
Okay.
yeah.
We don't need to get into that. But so yeah, we acknowledge that Twilight Princess has its strengths and its weaknesses, and so let's start talking about Skyward Sword,
Sure.
because I remember when you and we both played this game, and we were both kind of sour towards it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that Skyward Sword was like, while Twilight Princess was more about a thematic thing where it felt like a bit of a reactionary product. Skyward Sword, I
Hmm.
think they just wasn't firing on all cylinders, and I think that some of the temples just had a boring design, which I think is really not okay for Nintendo's stamp of quality. Um,
Yeah.
I found myself very disconnected from the world. It had, in my opinion, one of the least memorable worlds in any Zelda game. You had these segmented areas that were not connected, and there was a sky that was basically an overworld, but a very boring overworld, like an RPG style overworld. So it was just really weird to be in, like, let's play these almost level like segments, refighting the same boss and again and again and again.
Oh, what was that boss?
With the
He was a
toes.
kaiju looking thing.
Yeah, yeah. What eventually became the boss of the game. Like, we got it the first time, and like, if there was some sort of theme going on there with like the repetition, I didn't really get it, and I wasn't interested
Yeah.
enough, and it was just a little too long. Like, repetition is a tool, but it should be used really intelligently, and it was not here. It felt very forced, in a negative way. And I remember very distinctly getting to, I want to say, the 70% mark of the game and feeling drained, feeling like I was not into the game, not inspired to keep moving forward. And a standout moment for me was the ship, or the ship
Hmm.
temple. I forgot what it's called, but I felt that the boss of that temple fell out of place. I was very uninspired by playing through a temple 70% through a Zelda game at this point, and getting the arrows, which I've gotten a gazillion times in other games. There was nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like night and day. Comparing the Forest Temple, which was the first temple you do as adult Link in Ocarina of Time, and getting the arrows, it was like epic, and it was really meaningful because it was like that first sign of growth of like, this is a new world, and the Forest Temple itself was so mature. Everything that was great about the Forest Temple was boring in this ship, you know? So
Yeah.
I was just really not into it. And then luckily I did like
When
the ending, but you know.
when you bring up the ship temple or the ship dungeon, it reminds me of that awful boss design where it's just this cartoony looking
Yeah,
octopus
so out
monster
of
with the one
place.
eye. So when I first saw Skyward Sword in the E3 trailer, I think it was an E3 trailer, and um, they show Ocarina of Time with Link riding the horse, and then it shifts over to Link in the King of Red Lion's boat in Wind Waker, and then it shows the wolf, and the wolf is running, and these three things are running towards a beam of light, and then the screen flashes, and then it shows us this new Link in the Skyward Sword art style, right?
Right, right.
I was just not happy with it because it felt like the first sign of Nintendo just trying to please everybody and not,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, sticking to the strongest side of the spectrum.
Yeah,
So I
I
think
feel the
of
same way. It felt like a middle of the ground kind of thing. It didn't have the
yeah,
bold personality of Wind Waker, didn't have the clear direction and aesthetic feel, and it also didn't have the clear maturity and realism of a Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina
So
of Time.
it just
Yeah.
sat awkwardly in the middle, and it didn't gel in any sort of way that made me feel like I was even in a world.
Yeah, I just felt like it was like a compromise, but the compromise didn't really I feel like it didn't make anybody happy. It was kind of just
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are pissed off about Wind Waker and a lot of people who were wanted to do the Ocarina of Time style, and then just let's just cover our bases and make everybody happy.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that, and the monster designs were just so
Yeah. It was very
I
out of
couldn't take them
place.
seriously.
Yeah.
Whenever I saw I think are the smaller ones the bokoblins or the moblins? Which ones are they?
There's mini blins, which is the really tiny ones.
Okay.
At least that's in Wind Waker for sure. And then there's Bakablins is bigger, and then Moblins are the muscular ones typically.
Okay, so yeah, there are the regular enemies,
Yeah,
I guess
Bakablins, I
they were
think.
the moblins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know what the name is, but they looked like clowns. They were just these big
Yeah.
red looking impish things, and they had they wore underwear and stuff. It was just really silly.
Yeah, that's true. I
Or
forgot
they
about
they,
that.
they had loincloths or something.
Yeah,
And then you
yeah.
compare it to how they looked in Twilight Princess or
Or
in
even in Wind Waker.
Wind Waker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I took the ones in Wind Waker much more seriously, but in Skyward Sword they just looked like these oafish stupid guys. And I know that the enemies are easy to kill, right?
Yeah.
And I get that, but I just there was no magic. It just felt uninspired.
Yeah,
And then
it's kind of funny. Like people, I think, looked at Wind Waker and thought cartoony, and there's like this baked-in association of like cartoony with kiddish. And the irony is that I think that Skyward Sword actually did try these like tropey, cartoony ideas, like almost like
yeah.
you're in a Looney Tunes cartoon, like that kind of feel. Whereas in Wind Waker, everything felt more intentional in its use of its art style.
It's funny. I
Yeah.
actually had a realization that a lot of the enemies looked like they were inflatable toys because they were so bubbly looking.
That's funny.
And the kaiju boss that was just the mouth that would with the toes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it was just what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I don't know what it was. That whole game, I think, and it was weird because it was all like subtle things like that kind of. I wouldn't say that they added up. It's that they didn't add up. That's the kind of the point. It's that it was lacking in that vision where everything is working together towards a common aesthetic goal.
Yeah.
Things just kind of like felt like they were moving in different directions and they fought each other, and that's why I think it took me that long, even though it was still Zelda and there were still strong points that kept me into it and kept me going. By the time I got, in the second half of the game, I was just feeling drained because I wasn't invested in the same way I was typically in a Zelda game.
Well, not even just losing the investment of being into it, but I just felt like the game. I was tired, but it was because the game actually exhausted me.
Yeah.
the repetition set in, revisiting all of the areas, and and then there was the silent realms, right? Where
Right.
you needed to collect the light
The tiers or
sprites or
something,
whatever. I
yeah.
can't remember. Yeah, the tiers, right?
Yeah.
And that came back from Twilight Princess because everybody loved it so much, I guess. But in Skyward Sword, you had these silent realms where you needed to collect the tiers, but you couldn't go into certain areas where there was glowing water because the glowing water would alert the guardians that are in there, or
Right.
if you get caught in the lantern light, it would alert the guardians too. I think that those silent realms were really successful at creating fear and tension,
Yeah, I
just
think so, too.
absolute, genuine fear. But it was annoying to me because I had never experienced that, in a Zelda game, and I just thought that it succeeded at taking me out of my comfort zone.
Sure,
right?
sure. I didn't mind it so
And
much. I think that
yeah,
it wasn't as challenging to me. Like I actually am not a stealth game person in general. Like I never really, I was just always bad at them. But this game was just light enough these segments were just light enough where I was able to do them, and I did like the atmosphere of them. I rather liked that feeling of tension. And I liked actually, I think I liked the art more in those segments, just how the weird black and white had the realness of
Yeah.
it. And I liked the design of the Guardians. I thought they were really cool and scary. So
yeah, I think that the fear was really it was really effective for me. But I also feel like I just needed to experience it once and I could be done with it, but then they reintroduce it 3 more times.
yeah, I
And
feel
that's
that.
that's something that Skyward Sword is really guilty of. It kind of just put me in these positions that I didn't really want to, and it just kept bringing me back to those points.
Yeah,
And
I understand
it was
that.
hard for me to get anything out of it or feel, rewarded. I would feel relief because I completed it and I didn't need to do it again until a half hour later when I need to do it all over
Right.
again.
Yeah, I could totally get that.
But let's talk about the motion controls, because motion controls were a really big thing, even bigger than Twilight Princess, because we are actually able to go into what Nintendo would claim one-to-one controls. So how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the motion controls. I'll be honest. I know that many people who were turned off by them and couldn't get it to work. I figured out a method for myself, like a hand positioning and a way for me moving the wrist, and I figured it out pretty early in the game. So once I figured that out, I just didn't change it up. Like, I wasn't standing up, swinging my Wiimote wildly, purely immersed. Like, I think that's kind of the original vision of the Wii, was like, go all out kind of thing. I was actually sitting down and, like, very precisely moving my thing. And, at that point, it wasn't really a sword, but I was able to achieve precision. And I was always slicing the way I wanted, when I wanted, and I enjoyed it once I got to that point. But I did have to give up that, if I ever had any expectation of, swinging my Wiimote like a sword, I had to give that up very early in the game to achieve that point. I think many people were just, they couldn't do that, and they ran into the unforgiving motion detection I think the game had.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't have that issue. I was very lucky that I hit that point of precision, because the game with precision feels pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. For the most part, the motion controls they just caused me a lot of discomfort because, when you're flying the loft wing, you have to tilt the controller in order to guide the loft wing into whatever direction you want to move.
Sure.
I didn't like the bomb bowling feature.
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember.
And there was also the swimming controls. You had to use motion controls in order to swim. You had to dive. You had to learn how to dive and breach with motion controls, and that was really uncomfortable and inaccurate for me. And maybe I could have trained myself to do it, but it was just so uncomfortable that I didn't really want to do it, and I just kind of forced myself to get through it just because I wanted to see the end of the game. I think the game was good enough for me to want to complete it.
Right. Right.
But as far as the strengths of the motion controls, I will definitely miss aiming my bow and arrow with motion controls, because I think it was done really well in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. And now the current Zelda games on the Wii U, you're kind of just aiming with either the analog stick, or you can move your Wii U controller around in real life to aim, which is pretty cool. But shooting projectiles with the motion controls is something that I'll miss. And but yeah, I wasn't too big on it. Let's see. I think we gotta wrap this up a little bit more. But let's just talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the high points on Skyward Sword so that we feel like this isn't totally negative.
Yeah. I think I did like little things like I actually didn't mind the upgrading sort of system. Like I liked the feeling of my shield getting stronger. I liked the mechanic of my shield having damage. I actually created my own strategy of like putting my sword. You can choose to put your sword or shield forward. And because I was confident enough in my ability to counter, I put my sword forward. And the trade-off, of course, is that by putting your sword forward, you don't automatically block. You can only counter. But when you counter, your shield doesn't take damage. So I kind of liked that feeling of like, oh, if I put my sword, I'm kind of like I'm fencing a little bit. And I like the feeling of like I have to counter at all times. It was like an added layer of difficulty that I didn't even need. That I think is the good kind of expert mode, where it's kind of like, for people who are a little bit more defensive, they can put their shield up, but they have to do more management work because they have to keep healing their shield. I didn't have to do that. That was great.
If you want to talk about expert mode, actually,
sure.
And this actually goes back to my my point when fighting Beast Ganon in Twilight Princess, and how I didn't know what I needed to do in order to defeat him. Right.
Okay.
There's the final boss fight with Demise in Skyward Sword, and you just fight him mano a mano, just dueling it out with your swords, and you can counter him with your shield and all that. But then halfway through the fight, he goes into a second phase where he starts summoning thunderbolts, and he can use that to just severely damage you, especially if your shield sucks at absorbing lightning damage, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But I totally forgot that you could do Skyward Strikes.
Oh.
And so I beat the game. I beat Demise by just, no gimmicks. I would just attack whenever I found an opening.
Wow.
And try to dodge him. And then
wow, that's really amazing.
It took me so long, though. It was such a harrowing fight.
Wow.
Right?
I mean, that's kind of like what you're supposed to do, is like use the Skyward Strikes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, because I remember talking to you and our friend Stefano, because both of you guys were playing Skyward Sword, and I was just complaining about the final boss battle and how difficult it was for me. And I was like, is there something that I was missing? Because it just went on forever. I just never knew if I was actually dealing enough damage and getting him, getting his health down enough where I could defeat him. And Stefano, he just says, yeah, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to just point your sword upward, and that'll imbue your weapon with lightning damage, and then you can throw it back at him. And I was just, what the fuck, right? Excuse my language, but it was a skill that I learned, and then I totally forgot about later on, and I didn't know that you needed to use the Skyward Strike in order to summon the lightning bolts and do actual damage to Ganondorf. So I felt kind of dumb because I only used it to I never used the Skyward Strike in combat. It just felt like it would take too long for me to charge my sword up and throw that beam at enemies. I only used it in order to activate those stones that would teach you the songs, or to upgrade the Master Sword or whatever.
Yeah, I think they made a mistake where they made the mechanic very situational in its use outside of that battle. So it did feel very out of place for it to suddenly be like the key move. But
did you have that problem though? Like, were you instinctively doing the Skyward Strike in order to defeat Ganon?
Oh
Or
no, I mean,
Demise?
I think that I would think it's a pretty safe bet that most people didn't regularly use Skyward Strikes in battle. So it wasn't
Okay.
like an expectation of like, this is part of my battle strategy. Let me do a Skyward Strike. I don't think that was that at all. I actually think that there were some hints, and I don't remember what they were. There were some hints that a Skyward Strike, you should try one, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
um,
Demise kind of just demonstrates it demonstrates it for you right there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's sort of implication of like, I'm Skyward Striking.
yeah. And then again, Demise is using the evil version of the Master Sword, so
Sure.
it's kind of like
Yeah,
both are
there's
supposed to be foils to each other.
exactly,
I
exactly.
guess I just wasn't paying attention enough.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm guessing there was probably one more hint, but I don't remember exactly. I just remember that I did figure it out and I was able to beat him. So yeah,
Yeah. I even though I didn't fully enjoy Skyward Sword, I do want to play it again. I want
yeah,
to,
I think
I
I
want
do
to
too.
try it out all over again. I think what I I think what it was most successful at though was this relationship that it created between Link and Zelda, right? I thought that Zelda was a really great character in this one.
Oh
She
yeah,
actually had a personality. Um, but Tetra was a really feisty and sassy character in Wind Waker, and I
that's
enjoyed
true.
that.
Yeah,
But Zelda, I don't know. There's just something about her that I really liked. In Twilight Princess, she's kind of just she's just there to guide you at the beginning and the middle of the game, and then you save her, and that's it, right?
yeah. I
Um,
agree with you. She's pretty separate from Link's experience.
yeah. And it's in Twilight Princess. I never really felt like there was this relationship that was formed between Link and Zelda.
Sure.
But in Skyward Sword, I definitely got that. From the outset, they're both good friends and they care about each other.
Yeah, I think that
And
premise alone made made Skyward Sword pretty unique in that
mhm,
this is someone you already care about. Let's take a little bit of time in the beginning, which they'd never done before, to establish
yeah,
that connection. That way, everything that happens to her means more, which I think was pretty successful. They were like, you know what? If you're gonna be saving someone, let's make you care about it a little bit more.
yeah. Another thing too, that I think that Skyward Sword was pretty weak at was, according to the Hyrule Historia, Skyward Sword is the first Zelda event in the timeline, right?
Right.
Um, and there there were just some things that I think they didn't handle very well. For instance, Link he has the green tunic, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason why the rest of the Links in the future wear green is because green just so happened to be the color of Link's graduating class in the Knight Academy, right?
Sure. Sure.
So it doesn't feel as important, you know? It just kind of feels incidental, and then everybody just follows this tradition that you wear the green color if you're
Yeah,
the hero.
it's actually kind of funny because that's going against the story that Wind Waker tells. Wind Waker very clearly tells you the tunic is a symbol of the hero of time. It's the Ocarina of Time
Yeah.
Link and what he did, and because he's a hero, that's why this tradition exists.
Hmm.
And they kind of broke that in Skyward Sword, so that felt a little cheapened. I agree.
Remember in Minish Cap when that's supposed to be the origin story of Link's hat?
Is what? I don't remember. I loved Minish Cap. I don't remember.
um, so the Minish Cap told the story of Eslo. He was a Pickery or a Minish,
Right.
and Vadi was another Minish, and he transforms Eslo into a hat.
Right.
And when you at the beginning of Minish Cap, Link doesn't have a hat, but then he finds Eslo, and Eslo just hangs out on Link's head.
Right,
And that's
right.
the reason why Link wears a green hat. I thought it was cute,
Yeah.
Eslo was a cool character. I thought he was a good companion. But it's a good story. This is the reason why Link wears a green hat,
Yeah.
because it commemorates Eslo, and and the other thing too is before Skyward Sword came out, Minish Cap was the first story in the Zelda timeline.
Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, I guess you didn't know, but
I didn't know that.
yeah, and then Skyward Sword comes out and says, no, actually, we're the first story, and then it just says, yeah, all the heroes of time wear green because Link wore that when he was in high school. And that's just kind of disappointing, you know?
Yeah. That's okay.
I don't know if you read in the back of Hyrule Historia there's a short manga that actually tells another story
I
before
haven't.
Skyward Sword. It's very good. I'm not going to spoil it for you,
Okay,
but
I'll have to go read that.
There are Link and Zelda counterparts in that
Cool.
story, and you know, Skyward Sword is the origin story, but we're going to give you another origin story. So this is the origin of the origin because we heard that you like origins. So
Nice.
but give it a read. I think it'd actually be pretty cool to see that as a Zelda game in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. So we gotta wrap up the Dark Ages type of thing. That's I don't personally think that it's the Dark Ages, but it's kind of where Zelda is starting to get a little bit stale for some gamers.
Sure.
And but the future is supposed to be bright. And if there's any evidence of that, we could look at Link Between Worlds. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll get back into The Legend of Zelda and conclude this episode. So see you soon. Hey guys, welcome back to WobbaCast, and we are going to conclude our long Legend of Zelda discussion. So thank you guys for sticking around. And I find this stuff really interesting, so I love to talk about The Legend of Zelda.
Oh yeah, I can talk all day.
Yeah. So we got past Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. Now let's talk about Link Between Worlds, because Link Between Worlds was kind of it brought some newer ideas. It was familiar, but it was a refreshing experience for a lot of people.
Sure.
How did you feel about Link Between Worlds?
Sure. So to preface it, I think it's important to distinguish. It still uses the base Zelda formula that we know and love, but what they did was they introduced this concept of the rental system, where essentially you have these items that, instead of traditionally where you would find items in dungeons and you would find them as you reach the dungeons or in various places, instead there was a set of items available to you right from the get-go, and you can choose from among them to decide which areas you want to explore first. So there's kind of like a larger set of branches from an initial node. Was a newer approach to Zelda, because it's, instead of being actually linear, tangled up, where it's like, get one item, open up my space, get another item, open up my space some more, again and again and again. Now it's, here's a bunch of items that each one opens up spaces in different ways. How do you want to do that? Go. And so that, I think a lot of people reacted positively to that feeling of openness. It's like, the world is my oyster. I can go in any direction. Which item do I take first, kind of thing. So I think it was a pretty cool way to twist up the formula while still making it feel pretty Zelda. So
yeah.
Overall,
I have to say
also,
another thing too. Link Between Worlds, I feel like it's a really good example of a Zelda game that teaches you what you need to do. I think it's really successful at that. My fiance Jen, she watched me play Minish Cap, and we took turns playing it. So Minish Cap was the first experience that she had of playing a Zelda game.
Sure.
But again, we would trade off on when we would play. Link Between Worlds was the first Zelda game that Jen played from start to finish on her own, and she just loved it. And she's not really a gamer. She liked playing Sonic the Hedgehog when she was younger, and she will dabble in Super Smash Brothers whenever everybody gets together. She loves Mario Kart, but then I feel like The Legend of Zelda was her initiation to hardcore gaming, if she actually loved to just play video games all the time. But that's coming, for someone who doesn't really play video games that often. She was just sold, and she
Absolutely.
was hooked on this game. She actually beat it twice, and she when she beat it the second time recently, she was eager to just go in and start for a third time and maybe even do hero mode version.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's what's really important there, which I think is why this worked for Jen, and probably for many other gamers as well. That rental system was really the only major innovation on the formula, and what Nintendo did, which was just really, really well done, was they actually left everything the same. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything else basically was Link to the Past, other than that rental system, which was new.
Yeah.
And they took it and they just refined it. Everything was just tighter, and it had modern design principles. Everything was more accessible. It's kind of the polar opposite of the unforgiving, no hand holding of the original Zelda. This is like the total opposite direction, where everything is super accessible. Anyone can kind of break in and learn how to play as you go. So I
Yeah.
think that, and yet still there's enough depth for someone who's either experienced with Zelda, or someone who's just a more advanced gamer in general, to be able to pick up and find cool things to do and have fun. So I think that it has that modern design all the way through, where everything just feels great. It's open to all different kind of player types and player skill levels, and it's just executed really well. There's fun dungeons, fun items, fun puzzles, interesting characters, interesting worlds, lots of stuff to do. It's a great game overall.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I think it was really like they kind of played up the spiritual successor to Link to the Past, and in more than just thematically, and more in just the world layout. Really, like, it did the same thing that Link to the Past did. It refined things. It refined the 2D Zelda experience with one wrinkle, which was the rental system. And I think that was cool. They tried one new thing and they just refined everything else.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
Go Nintendo.
I feel like, I never played Link with not Link Between Worlds, Link to the Past before I tried out Link Between Worlds. And I feel like, it doesn't matter if you played Link to the Past.
Oh,
and
no, it doesn't.
If you did play Link to the Past, then there's stuff in the game that you're really gonna appreciate, and just that'll bring a huge smile to your face to revisit certain elements. But Link Between Worlds, I feel like that was a really good entry point for anyone who's interested in Zelda and has never tried it before.
That's a good point. It's an entry point for new Zelda fans, which is great.
And the other thing too is that just because it's an entry point, it doesn't hold your hand and tell you where you need to go. You can go out into the sprawling world if you feel like it, and pursue dungeons in whatever order you'd like. And I never really felt too lost in the game. So again, it wasn't too easy or too difficult. I feel like it struck a pretty good balance. And I think that the difficulty would just shift into a harder direction if you didn't explore enough. There was the low rule area when you needed to blow up these rocks that were blocking the entrance to a dungeon, and the only way that you could blow them up was if you led this giant bomb towards the rocks.
Yeah, I remember.
And I didn't know that, but I don't blame it on the game being too difficult. I just blame it on myself for not exploring and seeing what the world had to offer.
Right. That's a good point. This game did, more so than some other more recent Zeldas, it did kind of encourage you to go out there. And maybe that's actually a great reason for the rental system. The rental system implies go in every direction. Break your Zelda expectation of, I'm going in this direction. Try everything, go everywhere, be an explorer, which hopefully lended people to trying to do that. And it's important to note that, as a general rule in Zelda games, the slower you're progressing through the story, the more you're exploring between each node, right? If you imagine you get stuck on something, for example, that's actually a common opportunity for people to go exploring some more. Like, I'm stuck on this current thing, or I don't want to necessarily go to the next temple right now. Let me take a break from that and just like try and find some random things in the countryside. Whereas if you're kind of like powering through the game, you're more likely to miss things. So it just depends on the kind of player you are. There's the completionist kind of player who wants to get everything they can at every moment. So that could mean like, I have this new item, let me get everything I can possible, then go to the next item, or so forth. Or it can mean like, I want to just keep going forward.
Yeah. So. I do think that if you are just trying to breeze through the game, it will be more difficult, but not because you're not powerful enough. It's just you're not finding you're not utilizing all the resources that are available to you.
Exactly. Now consider that moment from the opposite perspective. Now, someone like me, and maybe some other players as well, I remember seeing that rock, and I made the connection in my head, and it made me feel a little smart, and it made me feel good. I was like, I wonder if there was that bomb there. I knew it had to be for something. There's a formula trope that I think works well in Zelda, where you assume that things are not there for their own sake. You assume that things are for a reason.
Yeah, it's very gamey in a way too, though.
Exactly, and it's the kind of thing that they have to be careful about when they obscure it or not, because of course the more obscured it is, the more world-like it might feel. At the same time, the more obscured it is, the harder it might be to figure something like that out, right? So
Yeah.
there's a trade-off there, and that's not easy at all. But in this case, I remember reaching that same wall and being like, I wonder if. And I remember it being fun. I remember it being like, it's gonna be fun to try and do this. Like, it felt the most emergent, even though it was a hand-designed moment. It felt the most like an emergent gameplay property. It felt like I was doing something that felt clever, even though it was exactly what they wanted me to do.
You know, that actually reminds me of in Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time, where you can use the hook shot or the grappling hook on. It doesn't have to be just in a plate that has the hook shot symbol on it, right? You can shoot the hook shot at a tree if you wanted to, and that'll launch you across the area, so you can make it to that tree.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was really good because I was still immersed in the world where, yes, if I had a hook shot in real life, I wouldn't be just restricted to shooting it at hook shot symbols.
Sure.
And then in Twilight Princess, you get the claw shot, but you can only use the claw shot on things that have the claw shot symbol. I mean, you can shoot it at a fence, at a metal fence where you can grab onto it.
Right.
And that makes sense. But when I would see that claw shot symbol out in the world outside of the dungeon where you find the claw shots, I would just feel like, oh, this is, I'm playing a video game right now.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's that trade-off of like, there's this desire to make the world feel a lot like a world. But there's always fights. And by the way, people have to deal with this in all kinds of games, not just in Zelda games.
Yeah.
How do I make it look like it's part of the world, but also make sure the player is not lost and they know what to do? So it's that right balance. And a lot of level designers, by the way, in 3D games, like even games like Uncharted and 3D linear games, a lot of their work is like really setting up the set piece to be like, it's a tree, but it's also your climbing post. It's a sign, but it's also your climbing post. Like, how do I make it feel like it's a living, breathing world? Is a lot of the level designer's responsibility, and it's not easy.
Yeah. I know that in the Uncharted series and even The Last of Us, Naughty Dog, they would paint key objects a yellow color. So if there was a ledge that you can grab onto, there would be, yellow paint on it.
Oh, cool.
Or if there was a crate that you can use to push into a position to use as a step stool, it would be yellow. And that actually worked for me because in real life, I would probably see these things. I would see these yellow objects. So that's something that, that worked for me. But now because I know that's the type of strategy that they used, I think, oh, okay, I'm playing a Naughty Dog game because they use yellow to lead me around the map.
Sure.
But this isn't a Naughty Dog discussion. This is a Zelda discussion.
Link Between Worlds, awesome game. I do have some issues with the rental system, but I more I mean, I don't know if I want to get into it. I have a whole blog post on it, but essentially, like, overall, I commend Nintendo for trying it out. Yeah. And I think that it did some cool things, and it accomplished the goals that they were trying to accomplish, which was, let's have the player go in any direction they want and feel pushed to explore. So they succeeded. That said, I do have some problems with it, which is that it takes out a bit of the surprise of the items.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, that's kind of a bummer when it's like these items are no longer baked into the world. It actually feels even more gamey, right? It's like, here's a set of items that are all conveniently useful for your adventuring. I happen to have them. Go take them and like beat the game with the game items, right? As opposed to like, this feeling, which, works and sometimes doesn't work in a Zelda game, but this feeling of like, I'm coming upon an item, or this whole temple was designed around this item very intentionally, right? There's that specialness to the items. When you open up that chest and they build up that moment of like, what is the item? There's even, I love things like they do this brilliantly in Ocarina of Time, but they do it in every Zelda game, where they're hinting at the need for the item and you're trying to make it work with like your limited resources. and they'll often do things where it's like you have to do a crappy version of what this item does really well, right?
Yeah.
An example would be like, taking a torch and like lighting a thing and shooting a regular arrow through a flame to get another torch to light, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's a lot of extra work, and the whole room might be like a 10-minute puzzle, and then you get a fire arrow, and it's like, oh, you know what? I could do this all I want right now, and you feel badass. You feel like you're solving this problem that exists. All of that goes away when you enter the temple with an item that you've known from the beginning, and the whole temple is designed from the get-go with that item. So that was kind of a bummer for me. There was no shift in perspective that traditional Zelda games have. Traditional Zelda games, you have a temple, you enter it, there's problems you can solve, and then there's a limit to how far you can go without the dungeon's item. Then you get the dungeon's item, and then it just shifts. That's great.
I actually, I agree with you on the loss of the surprise factor.
Sure.
And with with Link Between Worlds, when you have all those items, it's no longer a big moment where you unlock the boomerang or the bow and all of that, right?
Yeah.
You see everything immediately once Ravio, just holds your home hostage as his shop, right?
Right, exactly.
And I was bummed out by that because there are emotions that are associated with finding these items.
Exactly.
That being said, we already know that we're gonna get these key Zelda items.
This is
when
true.
I think
This is a good
when I
point.
think of Zelda, I know that I'm gonna get a bow. I will hopefully get a boomerang. The boomerang wasn't in Skyward Sword, so I was a little bit disappointed by that. But you know that you're gonna get the bow. You know that you're gonna get some form of a grapple device, if it's the grappling hook or the hook shot. I think that it's okay for those items to just be available to you from the beginning. We know we're playing a Zelda game. We know what items we're going to get.
But they didn't just do that. They also had new items as well.
Yeah, now that's where I'm getting to, actually. I think that those items are so key to the Zelda experience where it'd be great if, we already know that Link is an explorer. Everybody knows that Link is an explorer in his world. So Link is just going to have these items by default. Or he goes to a shop and say, oh, you're an explorer? You're going to need all of this because this is basic Explorer Gear 101, right?
Right.
And he gets all of those items, but when he goes into the dungeons, he still discovers new items.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
In a future Zelda game, I don't know if they're going to do this for Breath of the Wild, but if we just cut to the chase, get all the items that we expect, and, we have them, and then we go into the dungeons and we find totally brand new items that we have never even imagined before.
Sure.
That would be something that I'd be satisfied with.
Sure, I could see that.
But yeah, so before we finish off Link Between Worlds, what did you think about merging with the walls? Because that was something that, you were always doing that in this game. It was pretty consistent with this gimmick. I feel like in Zelda games there are some gimmicks that they introduce and they kind of drop them off halfway through the game, and then they pick them up because they remember that, oh, we have this feature, we need to use it again before this game finishes.
Sure.
So again, like in Twilight Princess, you were a wolf and then you finally use it again in the fight with Ganon. But in Link Between Worlds, you're constantly grabbing onto the wall to merge with it.
Sure. I think that I thought it was pretty interesting. I think it's pretty normal, like you say, for Zeldas to have a sort of featured mechanic, that's like the premise of the game or like one other twist of the game. I thought it was cool when it kind of asked you to think about the world's layout differently. That was fun. There was like this concept of like, this lets you do things that in a very not 2D way, right? So we have these expectations for how 2D worlds work, especially in the Zelda universe. And I think the painting did a good job of breaking that a little bit because you can do all these things that you couldn't do normally. That said, so sorry, there was a lot of moments where I felt like I had to think outside the box to use the painting, especially for like new power-ups. And then there were other times when I felt it was a little bit forced, like there was the two little rocks that tell you can't take the painting any forward. You know what I'm saying? And that to me felt a little bit out of place and a little bit like, well, now it's gamey again. Like, why would these two random rocks be here? It feels very constrained. So I don't know. I have
Yeah.
mixed feelings about it. Overall, cool. Sometimes felt a little constraining. Not constraining, but just a little forced.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think it was more successful than the special features that past games have done. Again, I always bring up the boss fights, but in Link Between Worlds, when you're fighting the the boss in the thief's hideout and he has a shield, you have to merge with the shield, and
Right.
he loses track of you, but then you can pop out of the shield and
Yeah,
attack
that
him
was
from
cool.
behind. I thought that was really good. There were a bunch of boss fights where there would be an enemy that would charge at you, but you could merge with the wall, so he would just hit his head against the wall, maybe.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
So
then
that's
and
great
then there's the
because
oh sorry, but there's the final fight with I forget the main antagonist. I forget his name in Link Between Worlds, but when he turns into his Ganon form, he merges with the wall, and then you merge with the wall to fight him, and you have to remember that the room is circular, so you could shoot the light arrows in the opposite direction because they will eventually hit him in the back.
right,
I thought that was so cool.
that was super
And
cool.
again, like I didn't feel like that was forced because the game just trained you to always think
Exactly.
about using the wall.
Which is a wonderful comparison because we had the opposite problem with the Skyward Strike, right? We just talked about
Mm-hmm.
that. It's a
Yeah.
great comparison because this is a mechanic that's baked into the core threads of the entire game, used consistently. The player's trained. By the time they get to the boss, it's not out of place to use Painting Link the way it was out of place to use the Skyward Strike, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I
So
think
kudos.
I like that. Link Between Worlds isn't my favorite Zelda game. I'm glad that I played it. I don't think I'll ever really need to play it again, but it's good. I give it a thumbs up. So
Yeah, same here.
okay, so let's wrap this up. We're gonna talk about the Breath of the Wild and beyond, and um, you know, we both not talked about. We both watched the footage that they revealed for Breath of the Wild this past E3. I was really excited about seeing this game because we got two delays. It was originally gonna release in 2015, I think, and then they moved it to 2016, and then before E3 they said no, we're gonna release it alongside the Nintendo NX, and I was upset by it, but a delay is usually a good thing for video games these days because it helps achieve the full vision, right?
Sure.
But I'm trying this new thing out where I don't watch too much of a video game because I want to experience as much surprise when I play it.
That's great.
But
I think that's the way to go.
when Nintendo decided to showcase Zelda for their E3 showing, I needed to watch it because I was frustrated with the delays, and I was thinking, all right, I need to know if these delays are going to be worth it. I want to see this game in action. Let's take a look. And then
Sure.
I enjoyed it for the better part. And then when I watched that footage, I was just okay. I've had my fill. I'm not going to watch anymore. I'm just going to wait till the game releases and experience it that way. I'm going to try to go in as blindly as I can.
Sure.
So how did you feel about the what was shown at E3?
So just to be clear, I didn't watch a lot of the Let's Play-ish kind of things, which were coming from the news outlets of like, let's play like an hour of the open world, let's play like an hour of a temple. I didn't watch so much of that because I was
Okay.
trying not to really but I did watch the trailers, of course, and I am aware of all the new things in the game.
Okay.
I am very intrigued and I'm very hopeful for Nintendo. Mostly, I'm very proud of them. I'm a big fan of them trying something a little bit riskier than playing with their formula. The same reasons that I was impressed with Link Between Worlds for twisting it a bit. I think they're trying the same thing here on actually a much riskier kind of thing with their formula changes. And I just want to see it play out. And I'm not, unlike other people, I'm not as afraid of them messing up. But that's just me wanting
Okay.
innovation, right? I'm
Yeah.
not as afraid of them trying this thing and it falling flat. There's a very real risk that by making lots of items, baked into the randomness of the world, not necessarily randomness, but kind of baked into the overworld, making them all upgradable, and making everything property based, it could make things feel looser, and it could make the items feel less special, the same way that we saw in Link Between Worlds. And it could be even worse if they do it wrong. So there's
Yeah.
this. I'm placing trust in Nintendo to be Nintendo and to up their execution and to really make sure that these new systems are adding to the Zelda experience or enhancing them and not undoing what feels like Zelda. And it might mean that they redesign Zelda. It might even mean that Zelda starts to take 2 new tracks after this. It's really hard to say. But overall, I am very intrigued, and I'm trying to be positive. So.
Yeah, I when I first saw the debut trailer, when it's just Hyrule, and then the Guardian thing, that tentacle armed thing, just starts chasing you.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the art direction on it because I thought it was what Skyward Sword should have been. I thought it was them actually nailing the Wind Waker aesthetic with the more mature look, and I was very happy with that, especially after being dissatisfied by Skyward Sword's direction.
Totally.
For me, it kind of reminds me of how Shadow of the Colossus looked, where it's a little bit washed out looking. I don't know if you get that.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
Okay. So that's something that I'm really stoked about. I'm actually, I'm definitely cool with there being an actual voice in the game. So I don't know, because you didn't watch any of the actual gameplay footage when people were trying it out.
Just a little bit I watched, but
yeah, there's a female voice that wakes Link up. Some people think that it's Zelda, but I think that's cool. There are a lot of people who stand on either side of if Zelda should have voice acting. So I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty cool with it. I don't know about that.
I mean,
what do you mean?
I mean, like, I think people have stronger opinions about Link having voice.
Oh, actually, yeah. I'm totally cool with Link being silent forever.
Yeah.
A lot of video games do it. It would be cool to hear some voices for other characters. There was this there's this video, this Legend of Zelda video series by this YouTuber named Matthew Matosis, and he talks about he touches on voice acting for the Zelda series, and he was saying that he wouldn't mind it, but he would hope that they would have their own language, like they were actually speaking Hylian or an unfamiliar language, kind of like how in Shadow of the Colossus, where you hear them talking, but you don't understand it. It's not a language that we're familiar with. It's not English. Idea. It's not Japanese or anything.
Yeah, the thing is, the tough thing is just Link doesn't not only does he not have a voice, he also doesn't say things in text either.
Yeah,
like he literally doesn't have he doesn't say things that we can hear. So even just wording, like if you were talking in another language and they had wording, it would still define his personality a bit. And I'm not personally against that, but it's something they have to be very careful with. So
yeah, Link. Yeah, for the most part, Link is, whenever you do have dialogue options for Link, it's either yes or no type of situation.
Yeah, but even then, it feels very abstract. Like it's the player. You don't know what Link exactly said.
Yeah, you don't know how Link feels about any of these things. Right. Is that what you're getting at?
No, not so much that how he feels, but like the delivery. For example, so let's say Mass Effect. Like if you hit yes or no, then he'll actually speak out his version of yes. You know what I'm saying?
Got it.
So there's the player choice of yes versus no, which is a player choice. And then there's the actual delivery, which delivers lots of personality. You can't say a line without delivering a little bit of personality, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it's like super dry, and you don't want that either. You don't want Link to be dry, and you don't want Link's personality to like jar with what people have had in their heads all along. So that's the risk. It's like, if you give him a voice, how do you give him the right kind of personality so that it feels like the Link that you've known all along?
Yeah.
And an example of doing it wrong would be Metroid. The Other M, yeah. They gave her a voice and it didn't sound or feel like Samus at all. So this is the same thing. It's like, and it's not that it has to be a certain way. It's just that it has to. It can't jar with our current image of Link and ourselves as Link. That's all.
It's always tough because everybody has their own idea of how a character should be.
Exactly.
when they don't really have a personality attached to
Yeah,
them.
and every game that they do that, they keep the tradition of him not having a voice, your image of Link is getting more and more baked in, you know?
I agree with that.
It's
I
the
didn't
same
think of that.
reason.
That's true though.
I think this actually fits to a good example also is when you read a book and you have an image of a character and then you watch the movie and it like it
Oh
didn't feel
yeah.
like the character or didn't sound like the character in your head and then you feel a little off. I think that
Yeah.
same offness is what they're trying to avoid, or what they've
Okay. Yeah,
traditionally.
you kind of open yourself up to more disconnect with the character because
Exactly.
you've created this version of the character in your head.
Exactly. The void is an opportunity for the player to fill in their own blanks, and if
Yeah.
they do so, and they become attached to their what they filled in.
Yeah, and that is kind of the point. A lot of people like to say that Link is the link between the game and the user, right?
Ooh,
So
sure, that works.
You've never heard that before?
I haven't, but it makes sense to me.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I've read that a lot of people think of Link. Link is literally the link between the game and the player.
Got it.
So,
Cool.
and what you've just described as the importance of Link being this void that people could fill in for themselves.
Well, okay, I don't know about that. I don't know if it's important that he is a void.
Okay,
What's important is whatever you filled in the void with,
got it.
and that's important to the player. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily think he has to be a void though. Yeah.
The jury's out. We'll see.
Cool.
So I have to talk a little bit about what I've seen in the gameplay.
Sure,
so,
please do.
I'm excited. I'm excited for this game, and let me go back a little bit. So with Skyward Sword, I was pretty disappointed by it. I think that if it weren't a Zelda game, I probably still would have liked it. Maybe because it's a Zelda game, it's more disappointing than it would be if it were in a vacuum. But we have to remember that that everything isn't created in a vacuum, right?
Correct.
But either way, I still think that Skyward Sword is a pretty good game. So
Sure.
with Breath of the Wild, I think that it'll be a good game no matter what. And it's up to you whether you measure it up to past Zelda games or if you compare it to current games, right?
Sure.
With Breath of the Wild, I am worried about it losing its identity in the Zelda, or losing its Zelda identity, and
Sure.
trying to adopt too many things that have been done in successful Western RPG open world games, right?
Right.
When I see weapons pop up after you kill enemies and they have stats and where it follows this kind of loot system, that to me doesn't feel like a Zelda game. It feels like Nintendo just trying to follow what has been done in other successful games. And that's fine, but I just feel like it loses that Zelda charm. And the other thing too is, if you're going to get an axe or a spear or whatever weapon, and you're going to get a better version of that weapon later on, that doesn't... I'm just not into that. I don't like comparing numbers or spending a lot of time in a menu doing stats, right? And the other thing too is, if you get the Master Sword, do any of those weapons even matter? Like, you're just gonna pick up this weapon, and it's not like you're gonna develop a relationship with it, because you're gonna throw it away for the next better weapon. And then when the Master Sword comes around, the Master Sword is gonna be the end all be all weapon.
Sure.
At
So
least,
yeah, there's a lot in there. What you just said. It's
Okay.
hard to respond to all those things, but I think that let me fixate on the last thing you said, which is about attachment to your items, right?
Yeah.
Or specialness of an item. And I agree that this is definitely a risk they're taking. So in the same way that the Link Between Worlds trivialized the specialness of the new items, they have the same risk here. And I think that there's a definite, like, the same solution we offered for Link Between Worlds could maybe be applied here. You have a set of generic items that are things you find. You have a set of special items that are things that are very rare, and there's only one of them, and they're kind of littered through the world, and maybe those are the more important special items. And then finally you have like your really big story-driven items like the Master Sword that fixated the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as long as you separate those feels in a clean enough way, it shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be an issue. Let me say it that way. So here's an example. You mentioned that you're concerned that the Master Sword will trivialize all the things you found, correct?
Yes.
But that may only be true if the Master Sword is used in the exact same way in the same kind of combat. And it is, in fact, better. Like, here's one interpretation. Have you ever seen? There's like I'm trying to think of a good example, but there's a kind of a trope in fiction where there's the sword of light or the arrow of light, and it can only hurt the bad guy, or it can only hurt evil. I mean, one interpretation could be the Master Sword actually, for the first time, isn't the best thing. Perhaps the Master Sword can only kill pure evil of a certain kind, and therefore it's not a replacement for all the items you've worked hard to find, but rather it's something you need for Ganondorf, but it's not necessarily, and it's the best for Ganondorf, and it's the definitive sword, but it's not necessarily the best in all regards. And that, I think, will be the deciding factor, is that they make these items, they separate these. There's items that have to be special in some way, like the Master Sword, or some puzzle-based items, and there's other items that maybe have to can fit into this larger system.
Yeah. But
so there's a lot of options they have, and it's not clear what they're going to do.
But I don't want the Master Sword to be a specialist. I want it to be the solution, the ultimate solution. It's called the Master Sword.
And that's fair. So you want I get that. There's a feeling that you want to complete. That's kind of the completionist, I think, feeling in general. Is like in Zelda games, there's clear differences between items, and there's but at the same time, the Master Sword isn't better than the boomerang, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Like the boomerang, first of all, the boomerang is OP in a lot of games, particularly Wind Waker.
Yeah,
like the boomerang in Wind Waker is nuts, but
the Wind Waker boomerang is so good. Anyway,
it's nuts, but but I never felt or cared that the Master Sword was better than the boomerang, because it's not. They're used totally differently. The Master Sword is the best sword, of course, and it should be, but I'm open to an interpretation of that, and I'm open to the game offering variety in other ways. It's also like the timing of when you get the Master Sword too, the things like that. If you're, first of all, have you confirmed the Master Sword's in this game?
Well, they show it in one of the final frames of the trailer for this past E3. So they show the Master Sword, and it's all rusted, and it's in its pedestal. And then the game kind of just fades out to its end screen. Not the game, the trailer.
There are some other options too. You can add limits, so maybe there's a limit, like you could only use the Master Sword in the final battle, which would be a bummer, but it's a possibility. It's like in Metroid Prime, the ending of Metroid Prime, you have this thing called the Phazon Beam that only exists in that battle. It's when you stand in a puddle of Phazon, and suddenly you become supercharged, and you have this cool new Phazon Beam. And it just destroys the boss of the game, and it's really satisfying. But it's not something that you get to then take and then use everywhere else in the game. Another example is Supersonic. Supersonic is something commonly seen only at the end of the game, but it is cool when you can use him to trudge through earlier levels. Yeah. So I think that they could do it like that, where it's like maybe the Master Sword has some sort of power constraint, and you can use it in the regular world, but you can only use it for a certain amount of time. There's definitely options to make it not the answer to all answers. If people are expecting it to be the answer to all answers, then there's not really much you could do. So I don't know. It's not an easy problem to solve. It is solvable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I understand everything that you're saying. It's just frustrating that I'm just going to be picking up several placeholder weapons until I get the Master Sword, because you do get placeholder weapons, but you won't. So in Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, you have your one sword, and then you get the Master Sword. And in Breath of the Wild, it just feels like I'm going to be picking up a lot of throwaway weapons until I finally get the Master Sword. But in Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, when I have my first sword, I've developed a relationship with that sword, and then I get the better one.
Sure. Can I offer a counterpoint? So,
yeah, sure. Of course.
I feel like this may be the same sort of semi-bias that you might see people going into Wind Waker when it comes to art style. It's like you're expecting a certain thing, you've defined this as your Zelda experience, and anything else feels wrong to you, that you keep using the word placeholder.
Okay.
and throwaway. And I would argue that people who play games of this type don't necessarily feel that way about those items. I mean, um, there's lots and lots of variability inside of there for good or bad. And if weapons are trivialized, yeah, then they feel like placeholders. But the system doesn't inherently trivialize the item. There's still lots of options to make things feel special, or for you to not care that things are not special. Let's put it this way: like when some things are not special, the things that are special are more special, right? The contrast is there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this sense of like, for example, like an individual green rupee is not special in any game, right?
Yeah.
Because they're everywhere and you can collect them all the time. But that the rupees don't make the Master Sword less special. Like they're totally unrelated. And that's why I think is kind of going on here is, or they have an opportunity here to decide how to treat different items. And there's a lot of decisions they have to make, but I think it's very possible to. Here's another way to think of it: is that the items that are in the sort of main system of exploring and finding and collecting and upgrading and stat comparisons, those are maybe more a part of the general exploration. And how baked that is into the traditional Zelda formula of going into temples, that's the part that's not clear, right?
Yeah.
And I think that how they treat that relationship is what's going to define the game. If the game is
true.
only this system and it doesn't matter what you bring into a fight as much, then it might feel trivialized. But if the decisions between different items are meaningful, now you have like the system of trade-offs. Like you talk about placeholder, but something is only throwaway if there's something that's clearly better. And that to me is like there's a little bit of like poor design going on there, where it's like you're giving me this one option to hold me over into the new thing. But some people like that. Some people like the feeling that I'm just growing over time. You know, like I have this item. It's the best I have right now. I hope I find a new one down the road that's a little bit better. But for now, it's what I can do. And it kind of defines who I am as a character, my strengths and my weaknesses. Oh, I have this great armor that's like several levels above what I'm capable of normally. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off the point. The main point is just that this is a certain kind of game that many people have bought into, the Western RPG format. And there's merits to it, but I think that if you approach it with this like everything is throwaway, you might be setting yourself up in the same way that Wind Waker people did.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the reason why I've been starting to look at it that way is I played Borderlands 1 and 2 and I've played Destiny, right? And there's a big emphasis on looting weapons and armor in those games.
Right.
And in Borderlands, you're getting guns constantly. You're picking up guns all the time, you know. And it's like I have this one gun and I'm totally cool and excited about it, but 5 minutes later, I find another gun that does more damage and, you know, has a higher set of stats, and then I throw away the last gun that I used, you know, 5 minutes ago.
Right.
And in a game like Destiny, you have all these different classes of weapons. You have legendaries and exotics and stuff. And that weapon is... So if I were to get an exotic weapon, which is the highest class of weapons...
Sure.
I'm really excited about it, but then, you know, there's eventually going to be a rollout of much better weapons. So my weapon that I've developed this relationship with is now obsolete. Right. And I think that's kind of that might be just the nature of how MMOs work, because they're always evolving.
Yeah, MMOs have their own set of constraints because they do have to grow and they have to give you new incentives. Like there's the completionist attitude doesn't work so well. It's great as a driving force, but if you once you get the ultimate loot, then they have to make you care somehow. Yeah. And it's hard for people to care once they've already gotten the best of the best. And a great example is WoW. Every time they up the level cap in World War, which is, you know, the longest running, most successful MMO to date, right? Every time they up the level cap, they have to introduce new items. And Marker was telling me the same thing. He worked so hard for these really, really intense legendary items, and we're talking hundreds of hours he's worked into. Hundreds of hours, lots of all that stuff. And then they released like the next level cap, and in the new land, his item was so common and so weak compared to the new stuff that like it was like, what did I even do? Like all that specialness was just thrown away, right? Yeah. So that sounds like they really kind of threw those players under the bus a little bit. and they have that, but Zelda doesn't have that constraint. Zelda doesn't need to keep growing. They can have a best thing. They can have rare things that are more special than other things, and that's fine. So comparing to Destiny, I don't think is fair. But comparing it to Borderlands is fair, and I think that Borderlands maybe they just didn't pace it correctly. They didn't do a good enough job of building relationships with your weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Borderlands' fault. That's not necessarily the system's fault. That's in their execution, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not the system of randomly finding things or the system of loot that's inherently flawed so much as it is the fact that they keep replacing these all the time, and that you don't develop relationships, and that you don't find any meaning, that it's just like waiting for the next thing. That gave you that feeling of like, oh, every gun is a placeholder, right?
Yeah.
I would encourage you to try Breath of Wild and just don't throw away your expectations. Just think like, I'm going to be Link, and whatever comes at me, I'll take it as I go. And then they still might fail, but
I guess I just really need to think of it in more situational terms, because there are weapons in Breath of the Wild that I've seen. So you could get a spear, or you could get an axe, or you can get a sword, and there are, it might do this Fire Emblem type of thing where whatever weapon, there's going to be a better weapon for a certain situation.
Right, exactly.
So I guess I just need to look at it that way.
Yeah.
But, aside from the stats, I don't want to spend so much time going through my inventory and just, because you can collect 1 million copies of one weapon and then you have to, just toss them all out or something.
Sure.
I just don't want to. I feel like that breaks up the pace that I've gotten accustomed to with Zelda games, and I just don't want to spend a lot of time in a menu comparing stats and trying to figure out what weapons or what items I'm going to toss out.
That's a great point. Inventory management is like a whole new level of mechanics that you traditionally see in RPGs and 4X games and that kind of stuff, and you have to love it. You kind of have to really buy into, these trade-offs, the system of like, nothing is better than anything else. It's about my own preferences. It's about my own opinions and my own strategy. And that has potential to be a lot of fun if it's like, here's like imagine the situation where there's like this series of bokoblins and moblins and stuff, and they have this cool structure in the distance, and it's like, I have this problem to solve. What's the best tool to solve? How should I optimize for the situation? Like, what's the strategy I want to use to go towards them? I saw, some implementation that they're trying to play up that emergent feel of like, I do this my way, which does actually play into exploration pretty well. So we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Either way though, I'm really excited about the Breath of the Wild game. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and we'll see what types of problems may crop up, but I'm going to take your advice, and I'm just going to, just be happy that I have a new Zelda game coming out. And, we could be experiencing another delay, or things could be worse. We could just not see another Zelda game in general.
Yeah. Or they can, let me also play devil's advocate. It would be really bad if they just were so afraid that we just get a lot more cop-outs and reactionary products.
True.
I'd rather them do this and take a risk and maybe fail at their risk than them just make the same Zelda over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely true.
So I say go for Nintendo. Good luck.
Yeah, and good for you. Okay, so guys, that was our Zelda episode on WobbaCast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. I know that we are pushing 2 hours on this episode, but Zelda is such a great series that there's just so much to say, so much to cover.
Covering Zelda in 2 hours, we're clearly pros.
Yeah, so. Obviously. So, Rohit, I think this is a wrap. What do you plan on doing for the rest of the weekend?
Chilling. That's it. Maybe playing some games. Maybe.
What kind of games?
I don't know. I just started FTL, so maybe I'll play that some more.
Nice. Okay.
But I'm not sure.
Sweet. I'm playing some Persona games for the second or third time, and
nice.
Just to it's my favorite. Well, Persona 4 is my favorite game of all time, and I just keep coming back to it because I enjoy it so much.
Nice.
So, but I think I need to take a little bit of a break because I've just been playing a lot of video games lately, especially because of the Let's Play channel that I'm trying to put together. So I need to take some time off.
Nah.
But yeah, so that's WobbaCast episode 1 on The Legend of Zelda. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you.